That night I took my daughter to the airport thinking it was just another routine work trip, nothing more than the usual goodbye. Everything felt normal until my 7-year-old grandson suddenly squeezed my hand so hard it startled me. When I looked down, his face was pale and his eyes were filled with fear. In a shaky whisper he said, "Grandma, please don't take us back home. I heard Mom talking this morning. She's planning something bad. Please believe me." In that moment my heart dropped and something deep inside me cracked. I didn't ask questions or stop to think. I just started the car and drove into the night with him. But before I go on, make sure you're subscribed and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing how far these stories reach. My name is Binham. I'm 70 years old, and until that night I truly believed I knew my daughter Candace better than anyone. I had been living with her and my grandson Devon ever since my son-in-law Reggie passed away in a car accident 3 years earlier. A tragedy that changed all of us and turned Devon into a quiet, watchful child who noticed everything but said very little. That Thursday, we drove Candace to Hartsfield-Jackson Airport for her business trip to Chicago. She works as a marketing manager and travels often. We arrived early and the terminal felt almost empty, the cold air making me pull my coat tighter around myself. "It's only 3 days, Mom," Candace said with a smile while adjusting her bag. "Take good care of Devon and don't forget his medicine." Devon stood beside me holding his dinosaur backpack like it was the only solid thing in the world, staring at his mother without a word. He had never been very talkative, but that night he was quieter than usual. I tried to cheer him up and said, "Everything will be fine, sweetheart. We always manage, don't we?" He only nodded. Candace knelt in front of him, brushed his hair back and told him to be good for Grandma and that she'd be back soon. She kissed his forehead and he didn't move at all, standing there stiff and silent, like a little statue. That I watched my daughter walk away with a heavy but proud heart, thinking about how much she had changed over the years. Life had not been gentle with her, yet she had grown into a determined and capable woman, especially after losing her husband, when she buried herself in work as if staying busy could keep the pain away. I admired her strength even though I couldn't ignore the quiet distance that had slowly formed between us. "I have to go," she said after checking her watch. "They'll start boarding soon." We shared a quick hug that felt more like a habit than a comfort, and she kissed my cheek, picked up her bag and headed toward the gate without looking back. I stood there with Devon and watched her disappear into the crowd. Then I took his hand and said it was time to go because it was getting late. We walked through the long hallway toward the parking garage and he didn't say a word, which didn't surprise me since ever since his father's accident, he spoke more with his eyes than with his voice. The garage was dim and quiet with only a few yellow lights and almost no cars. I pressed the key and our old Chevy's lights flashed in the distance, so I started walking toward it, gently guiding Devon along. Suddenly he stopped so hard that my arm jerked back and his small fingers dug into my wrist. I turned, confused, and bent down to ask what was wrong. Under the weak light, his face looked pale, and his eyes were wide with a kind of fear I had never seen in him before, which sent a cold shiver through me. In a barely audible whisper he said, "Grandma, please don't take us back to the house. Please believe me." I tried to calm him, thinking he was just scared to stay home without his mother, and told him we would be fine for a few days, just the two of us. But he shook his head and held on even tighter, his voice breaking as he said he had heard his mom talking on the phone that morning in her home office, talking about us, and as he leaned closer to my ear to tell me more, my heart began to pound in a way it hadn't in years. In a trembling voice, Devon told me he had heard his mother talking after we were asleep, saying everything was already prepared and that it had to look like an accident, something about a gas problem that no one would question, and in that moment I felt the cold rush through my entire body as if the air had been knocked out of me. I stood there staring at him, at that small face and those frightened eyes, realizing he was carrying something no child ever should. "Please, Grandma," he whispered, barely able to speak, "believe me this time," and those words broke something inside me because I suddenly remembered other moments I had brushed off, when he said his mom was hiding documents or staying up all night working on the kitchen pipes. Things I had foolishly dismissed as a child's imagination. My hands began to shake, and even though my heart refused to accept it, the fear in his eyes told me this was real. I bent down, held his face gently, and told him I believed him and that we were not going back home, and the relief that washed over him was so deep that it erased my last doubts. Somehow this little boy had uncovered something terrible. I helped him into the car, buckled his seatbelt and sat behind the wheel, struggling to even start the engine because my hands wouldn't stop trembling. When he asked where we were going, I told him we were going somewhere safe, even though I had no idea where that was yet. I drove out of the garage and kept driving, knowing we couldn't go to a hotel or to anyone we knew because she could find us, and after nearly an hour on the road, Devon finally fell asleep in the back seat, worn out from fear and stress. I watched his peaceful face in the mirror and wondered how someone so small could carry something so heavy, while my own mind raced through the past few months, remembering how Candace had become more distant, more secretive, always locked in her office and speaking in low voices, and what I had once blamed on stress and grief now slowly began to look like something much darker and far more frightening. That I pulled into a small gas station that stayed open all night at the edge of the city because my head was spinning and I needed time to think. I bought a weak cup of coffee I barely tasted and went back to the car, watching Devon sleep in the back seat, when suddenly my phone started buzzing in my pocket and Candace's name appeared on the screen, making my heart jump because her plane should have been long gone. With shaking fingers, I answered and tried to sound normal, and she asked where we were and why we weren't home yet, as if she had been watching the clock. I lied and said we stopped to eat because Devon was hungry, and after a short pause she said her flight had been delayed and she was coming back in the morning, which made no sense because she always planned everything carefully and never left things to chance. I played along, told her we'd see her later, and hung up knowing it had been a test, a way to check if we were still walking into her plan. When Devon woke up and asked if it was his mom, I told him the truth, and the fear in his eyes told me he already understood what it meant. He said she knew we had found out, and I felt the same cold fear in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm and asked him to tell me exactly what he had heard that morning. Sitting up, looking far too serious for a child his age, he explained that he heard his mother go into the office early, and even though he knew he shouldn't, he listened at the door and heard her say that we would be alone for 3 days and that a gas problem during the night would look like an accident and no one would ever question it. Devon hesitated for a moment, took a deep breath, and then told me he also heard his mother talking about documents and insurance, saying that once we were out of the way, everything would finally be hers, and those words sent a cold wave through my whole body. Suddenly, all the pieces started to fit together because 6 months earlier my late husband had left behind important insurance papers, and Candace knew very well that I was the main person listed, with a large part set aside for Devon that he couldn't touch until he became an adult. She managed the paperwork, but she couldn't actually use any of it while I was still alive, and on top of that the house belonged to me too, a house that kept becoming more valuable every year. When I asked Devon if he had heard her talk about money before, he nodded and said she often got angry and once complained that she was stuck because of us, and hearing that felt like my heart was breaking in two. It was hard to accept that my own daughter could be thinking this way, but when I looked back at her strange behavior, her sudden interest in finances, her constant questions, and now this fake trip, everything started to make terrible sense. Devon asked what we were going to do, and I looked at this brave little boy who had noticed the danger before I did and told him that first we were going to get even farther away, and then we were going to find proof of what she was planning so we could show it to the authorities. He nodded seriously, even though this was far too heavy for a child, and as I drove through the quiet night, a risky idea began to take shape in my mind. I looked at him in the mirror and asked if he remembered Mr. Harrison, the doorman from our old building, knowing that this might be the first step in a plan that could finally protect us. Wallace Harrison was an old and trusted friend, a quiet and dependable man who had worked for many years in the building where we used to live, and as I drove toward that familiar neighborhood, I knew he might be our only safe option. It was a dangerous choice, but we had very few alternatives, because we needed a place to hide for the night and, more importantly, someone who could help us uncover the truth before Candace had another chance to act. When we arrived, the clock in the car showed it was already past 1 in the morning, and I parked a short distance away from the building, careful not to stop near any cameras. I asked Devon to stay in the car for a moment while I went to see if Wallace was working, and when I reached the security booth, I felt a wave of relief seeing him there, quietly reading. He was surprised to see me at such a late hour, but when I told him I needed help, he didn't hesitate and brought us to his small, simple apartment hidden in the back of the building, a place few people even knew existed. Devon sat at the table drinking warm cocoa while I explained everything, and Wallace listened in silence, clearly struggling to accept what he was hearing. He finally said it was a very serious thing to accuse my own daughter, and I admitted I wished with all my heart that it wasn't true, but I couldn't ignore what Devon had heard or the strange signs that now made sense. After a long pause, he asked what I planned to do, and I told him we needed real proof, because no one would believe us based only on fear and a child's words, especially with Candace's good reputation. When he asked how he could help, I took a deep breath and said that, as frightening as it sounded, I would need to go back to the house, and I felt Devon grow tense the moment those words left my mouth. That I explained that I wasn't going back to stay, only to search for proof, and that Devon would be safer here while I did it, but he immediately protested, saying it was too dangerous and that his mother might return at any moment. I held his small, cold hands and told him I would be careful, that I only needed a quick look inside her office and would leave before anyone noticed. But he shook his head with tears in his eyes and said he didn't want to be left behind. I promised him that Mr. Harrison would stay with him and that I would come back soon, though Wallace looked just as worried and said it was too risky for me to go alone. I told him I had no other choice because if Candace realized we knew something, she could destroy everything or do something even worse, and that thought made my stomach twist. After a long moment, Wallace agreed to drive me and wait nearby, promising to call the police if I didn't return within 20 minutes. Which was better than nothing. Devon begged to come with us, but I refused and hugged him tightly until he finally let go, making me promise again and again to be careful. Before we left, Wallace gave me a simple unregistered phone and we agreed on signals. 1 missed call meant I was fine, 2 meant I needed help, and after making sure Devon was settled and the door was locked, we drove off. We stopped a block away from my house just after 1 in the morning, and the street was empty and silent, with only a few lights stretching long shadows across the road. The house stood dark and quiet, and there was no sign of Candace's car, but my heart was racing as I told Wallace to wait and call for help if I didn't return on time. I slipped out of the car and walked quickly toward the house, unlocked the back door and stepped inside, where the only sounds were the refrigerator and the old clock in the living room. Using a small flashlight, I slowly made my way toward the stairs, trying not to make a sound, but every small noise felt loud in the silence, and when I reached the first step I suddenly froze, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. As I stood there, I noticed a strange scent in the air, slightly sweet and sharp at the same time, something that didn't belong in a normal house, and when I tried to recognize it, I realized it definitely wasn't gas, which only made my unease grow. Going up the stairs felt endless, and I carefully chose each step, avoiding the ones that usually made noise, until I reached the hallway and stopped in front of Candace's office door, which was locked just as I expected. I pulled out the hairpin I had brought, remembering how years ago I had learned to open simple locks when she was a stubborn teenager, never imagining I would use that skill like this. After a few long, nerve-wracking moments, the lock finally gave way and I eased the door open, holding my breath as I slipped inside. The room looked perfectly neat, just like always, with tidy shelves, a clean desk, and her computer sitting closed as if nothing in the world was wrong, but I knew better. Since I couldn't open the computer, I started checking drawers and folders, moving slowly and carefully, until I found a red folder hidden beneath ordinary papers. Inside were bank papers from accounts I didn't recognize, records of large transfers to unfamiliar names, and worst of all, a copy of my own insurance paperwork covered with handwritten notes about amounts and conditions. My heart started racing because this was proof that Devon had been telling the truth. Just then I heard the front door open downstairs, and fear rushed through me as I realized Candace was back. I quickly used my phone to signal Wallace that I was in danger, then took several photos of the most important pages before putting everything back exactly as it was. I turned off the light and hid behind the door, barely breathing, while slow, steady footsteps began climbing the stairs toward me. The footsteps didn't sound like Candace at all, not quick or confident, but slow and careful, as if someone was trying not to be noticed, and my heart started pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. I realized I was trapped because if I left the office I would be seen, and if I stayed I could be discovered at any moment, either now or later. The steps stopped right outside the door and I could hear quiet breathing on the other side while a shadow slid under the crack, blocking the weak light from the hallway. I pressed myself flat against the wall, hardly daring to breathe as the handle slowly turned and the door opened just a little. A tall shape appeared on the floor and I knew immediately it wasn't Candace because this person was bigger and broader. The figure stood there listening, and then I heard Candace's voice from downstairs asking if everything was clear. When the man answered and said the house was empty, I felt a cold wave of fear when she called him Marcus, the same name I had seen in the papers. She sounded upset and said the timing was wrong, that things were no longer going according to plan, and I could hear her coming up the stairs. I understood then that I was caught between two people who were clearly working together, and my only possible escape was the office window that led to a very narrow ledge over the backyard. The man complained that involving a child was risky, and Candace brushed it off, saying no one would believe a 7-year-old anyway. Suddenly, a noise came from downstairs, followed by hurried voices, and the man rushed down to check while Candace walked toward my room. I realized that Wallace must have come inside after my warning, and now he was in danger too. Moving as quietly as I could, I slipped out from behind the door, checked the empty hallway, and went straight to the window, knowing I had to get out and get help as fast as possible. I opened it slowly and looked down at the narrow ledge and the long drop to the yard, knowing that in any other situation I would never even think of doing something like this, but now I had no other choice at all. But when you are truly desperate, you find strength you didn't know you still had. I carefully put one foot outside into the cold air and then forced myself to bring the other one through the window, standing unsteadily on the narrow ledge while my aching body complained at every move. At my age, even simple steps are painful, but fear pushed me forward in a way nothing else could. Then I heard loud, angry voices from downstairs, followed by a heavy noise and a painful sound that I recognized as Wallace. My chest tightened because I knew they had found him. I heard the man demanding answers, asking who else was with him and how he knew to come here, and although I couldn't hear Wallace's reply, the sounds that followed made me turn away in helplessness. I silently asked my old friend to forgive me, knowing the only way to help him now was to escape and get help. Slowly I began to move along the ledge, pressing my back to the wall and holding on with my fingers inch by inch, while cold air and nervous sweat mixed on my face. When I saw the ivy-covered frame at the corner of the house, I knew it was my only chance to get down safely. Just then, I heard the man shout that he had caught someone and Candace answering from my room, and when he said that person seemed to know me, I froze, realizing they knew I was nearby. There was no more time to move carefully, so I reached for the frame and started climbing down, ignoring the pain and the scratches, and dropped the last short distance onto the grass in a clumsy landing that sent pain through my side. I forced myself up and hurried across the yard toward the low wall near the neighbor's house, staying in the shadows as the office window was thrown open and a bright light swept across the yard. I hid behind a bush, barely breathing, while the man shouted and said he was coming to look outside, then struggled over the wall and fell into the neighbor's yard, where I ran past their quiet house, feeling sharp pain with every step but refusing to stop. By the time I reached the side street, my chest was burning and I could barely catch my breath, but fear wouldn't let me stop. I kept moving, staying in dark areas until I reached a brighter avenue where a few late-night places were still open and people were walking around. With shaking hands, I pulled out the spare phone and called for emergency help, and while it was ringing, I quickly checked the photos I had taken, reminding myself that the evidence was real and still there. When the operator answered, I gave my name and forced myself to speak clearly, saying that my daughter was planning to harm me and my grandson for money and that her partner had just caught a friend who tried to protect us. There was a brief silence and I could almost feel the doubt on the other end of the line, but when the operator asked where I was, I gave the location and begged them to send officers to my house right away because my friend's life was in danger. I explained that I had photos of important documents and that my young grandson had overheard everything, and even though it sounded unbelievable, I told them there was no time to waste. While I was still on the phone, a police car rolled slowly past and I started waving both arms until it stopped. I told the operator the officers were there and ended the call, then quickly showed the police the pictures and explained everything again, including that my grandson was safe for the moment and that my friend might be hurt and being held inside my house. Whether it was my panic or the proof on the screen, something convinced them, because one officer called for more units while the other helped me into the car, and the older one looked at me seriously and said they would go save my friend first. The officer said they would look for my grandson next and asked me for the exact address of where he was staying, and I quickly gave them the location and explained how to reach the small apartment in the old building. But my fear only grew because I realized Candace and her partner might guess where Devon was once they knew I had escaped, especially if she remembered Wallace and our long friendship. The police cars rushed through the quiet streets, their lights flashing but sirens silent, and 2 more cars followed close behind. As we reached my house, I told them about the back entrance and said Wallace should be inside. They stopped at a safe distance and told me to stay in the car while they moved into position, and I watched in helpless silence as they spread out and spoke quietly into their radios. Then everything happened at once. Shouts to stop, the sound of breaking glass, doors slamming, and a brief struggle before the noise suddenly ended. A few minutes later, Wallace was helped out, limping and bleeding from the head, but alive, and I broke down in tears from pure relief. Soon after, a large, angry-looking man was brought out in handcuffs, but Candace was nowhere to be seen. The officer told me she had likely run out the back, and a cold fear went straight through me as I whispered my grandson's name. We rushed toward the building where Devon was staying, this time with the siren on, and I sat in the back twisting my hands while Wallace tried to reassure me, though I couldn't shake the feeling that Candace might guess where to look. When we finally arrived, my heart nearly stopped because the service door to the apartment was already standing open. "Stay here," the officer ordered, weapon drawn, but I couldn't. I bolted from the patrol car with Wallace limping behind me and ran down the dark hallway to the apartment. The door appeared untouched, but the silence inside made my chest tighten. I called Devon, my voice trembling. "Devon, sweetie, it's Grandma. Are you there?" Only silence answered me. The officer tried the handle, found it locked, and then kicked it open with a loud crash. Flashlights lit the small apartment, revealing the kitchen empty and the sofa bed messy. My heart sank when I spotted a torn piece of paper stuck under an empty cup. Hands shaking, I picked it up and read the note. "Mama found me. She said she needs to protect me from you, that you're crazy and making up stories. I'm scared, Grandma. Help." I crumpled, and Wallace caught me before I fell, whispering steady reassurances. "Candace, she had taken Devon." The officer radioed immediately, alerting units, setting up roadblocks and issuing citywide searches, but I knew how carefully Candace had planned this. She knew Devon and had escape routes, maybe even fake documents. At the precinct, Wallace and I gave detailed statements, showing photos of the documents, recounting everything Devon had overheard, and explaining the life insurance and Candace's growing obsession with it. The sergeant, a weary but focused man, listened carefully, taking everything seriously. Marcus, the accomplice, had started cooperating, confirming Candace had hired him to stage a gas leak to kill us and collect the insurance money. Nausea and dread churned in me at the confirmation. I asked about Devon, my voice breaking, and the sergeant admitted they had no leads yet, though all exits were being monitored. Each passing hour stretched my fear unbearably as I sat with a cold cup of tea, Wallace silently holding my hand, both of us trapped in that tense limbo, waiting for any news of my grandson. "We'll find him, Misera," Wallace said after a long, heavy pause, and I tried to hold on to his confidence, reminding myself how sharp and observant Devon had always been. Just then, a forgotten detail hit me and I sat up straight, remembering something he had casually mentioned days earlier about Candace showing him a surprise house in the countryside with animals and a lake, a place he had been very excited about. I quickly told the officer and the sergeant, explaining that Candace might have prepared it as a hiding place, even though I only vaguely remembered the town's name, something like Willow Creek or Cedar Ridge. It wasn't much, but the police immediately started checking property records in similar areas within a few hours' drive. Then more bad news arrived. Candace's car had been found abandoned at a gas station heading west, meaning she had likely switched vehicles. The sky was beginning to lighten and the clock showed 5:30 a.m. when my phone suddenly rang from an unknown number. When I answered, Devon's frightened little voice nearly broke me. He whispered that Candace was asleep and he had secretly used her phone to call me, telling me he was in a house near a lake surrounded by trees and that the drive had been long. I stayed calm, praising his bravery while the police traced the call, and gently asked him to look for any sign. After a tense pause, he whispered that there was a mailbox near the entrance and it said Riverwood Ranch, Highway 142, and in that moment, hope finally had a real direction again. My heart pounded in my chest. This was the clue we had been waiting for. "Devon, you are amazing," I whispered, my voice shaking with both fear and relief. "Now listen carefully. Find a safe place to hide. The police are on their way, but it may take a little while. You need to stay away from your mother. Do you understand?" "I understand," he whispered back. "There's an old barn behind the house. I'll hide there." "That's perfect, sweetie," I replied, my throat tightening as tears stung my eyes. "And Devon, I love you so much. Everything is going to be all right." "I love you too, Grandma," he murmured, then even more quietly, "She's moving. I have to hang up." The call ended abruptly. I sprang to my feet, immediately relaying the information to the sergeant. Within minutes, the operation was underway. Several properties lay along Highway 142, but Riverwood Ranch would be unmistakable. "You must stay here," the sergeant insisted, briefing us as officers prepared for the rescue. "We'll go get your grandson and arrest your daughter." But I couldn't wait. Devin was alone, facing the terrifying reality that his own mother could harm him and me. He needed a familiar, protective presence. "I'm coming with you," I said firmly, leaving no room for argument. The sergeant reluctantly agreed on the condition that I keep a safe distance until the situation was controlled. Wallace insisted on joining despite his injuries, his quiet determination echoing my OWN.AT. The first light of dawn, we set off westward in a caravan of patrol cars. The rising sun painted the sky with pink and gold, a cruel contrast to the darkness gripping my heart. I stared out at the passing fields, thinking about what had driven Candace to this point. My sweet girl, whom I had held in my arms, watched take her first steps, heard speak her first words, had transformed into someone capable of coldly plotting the deaths of her own mother and son. Money was certainly part of it, but there was something deeper, a chilling detachment that had grown over the years. Perhaps it began after Reggie's death, or perhaps the signs had been there all along and I, blinded by love, refused to see them. These bitter reflections followed me as the city gradually gave way to rolling fields and scattered rural properties. Every mile heightened my anxiety. When we finally reached Highway 142, my heart raced uncontrollably. Riverwood Ranch lay ahead, and with it the fate of my grandson, and the reckoning with my daughter, was about to unfold. A small sign marked the entrance to Riverwood Ranch, a narrow dirt road winding through thick trees until it vanished around a bend. The police stopped the patrol cars before the entrance to avoid alerting Candace, planning to approach the property on foot in a coordinated sweep. "Wait here, Miss Alara," the sergeant said firmly but kindly. "We'll get your grandson back safely." I nodded, holding Wallace's hand tightly as we watched the officers disappear into the trees. The next few minutes stretched endlessly. From the patrol car, I strained to see through the foliage, catching glimpses of shadows and hearing occasional coded chatter over the police radio. Then a sudden shout, followed by the sharp crack of a gunshot, cut through the quiet morning and my heart stopped. Without thinking, I threw open the car door and ran down the dirt road, ignoring Wallace's calls to wait. Devin was in danger. My grandson, my whole world, and I couldn't wait a second longer. Pain in my hip and shortness of breath vanished under sheer adrenaline as I ran faster than I had in years, Wallace limping behind me. Rounding the bend, the house came into view, a simple two-story with a wooden porch, and about 100 yards behind it, the barn Devin had described. Officers were strategically positioned around the property, weapons ready. Then I saw her, Candace, pale, disheveled, and terrifyingly angry, holding Devin in front of her like a shield, a gun glinting in the morning light. "Nobody come closer or I'll shoot," she screamed. The sergeant stepped partially behind a tree, his tone firm but calm. "Miss Candace, put down the weapon and let the boy go. There's no way out. The house is surrounded." Candace's voice cracked as she shouted back, full of rage and desperation. "You don't understand. She stole everything from me. My father left that money for all of us, not just for her," Candace shouted, her voice trembling with fury as she held Devin tightly. She had always felt controlled, always denied what she thought was hers. I stood a few feet away, hidden behind the patrol car, stunned by her words. Every sentence cut deep, revealing how she saw me, a strict, controlling figure who stole from her. Devin sat pale but focused, scanning the area for an escape route, his sharp mind working even in the chaos. "Your father left the money for everyone," the sergeant called out calmly, trying to defuse the situation. "We can resolve this without anyone getting hurt." "Lies," Candace shrieked, tightening her grip on Devin. "She manipulated everything, twisted the will, made me look insane, made it seem like I want to kill her." Wallace reached me then, gasping, and grabbed my arm, urging me to stay put. "Don't expose yourself. The police have it under control," he whispered. But I couldn't stand still. Candace's wild, wide eyes were fixed on us, her hand shaking slightly on the gun. That's when I noticed Devin subtly signaling toward the barn behind the house. Following his gaze, I saw an officer quietly moving into position behind the barn, flanking the house. Devin was keeping his mother focused on the front while the police prepared, his courage and intelligence astonishing for a 7-year-old. "Candace," I called, stepping forward despite Wallace's pull on my arm. Her eyes snapped to me, the gun raised, fury and disbelief in her gaze. You, she hissed. You should be dead. No fire, Candace, I replied calmly, stepping closer, buying time for the officers. Your plan failed. Devon overheard everything. He saved us. Her face twisted with rage and shock, and she glared at Devon, who held her stare without fear. You, she whispered, trembling. You betrayed me. He didn't betray anyone, I said, moving slowly forward. He protected the people he loves, just as I always tried to protect you. She laughed, a harsh, hysterical sound. You suffocated me, controlled my life, my money, my dreams. When Dad died, that money should have been mine, Candace screamed, her hand shaking violently as she held the gun. It was never about the money, Candace, I said, keeping my voice steady despite my heart racing. Your father wanted you to succeed on your own, not live off an inheritance. He loved you. I love you. Lies, she shouted, her fury twisting her face. If you loved me, you'd have given me what was rightfully mine. I realized then that nothing I said would reach her. Years of resentment and greed had hardened her into someone unrecognizable. Let Devon go, I pleaded, stepping closer to the porch. He's not part of this. It's just between you and me. For a fleeting moment I thought she might listen. A flicker of hesitation, maybe even guilt. But in that instant Devon acted. With lightning speed he bit her arm and twisted, rolling off the porch. Candace screamed in pain, the gun went off into the air and police officers swarmed from every direction. I dashed forward, ignoring shouts to stay back, and reached Devon as the officers subdued Candace, forcing her to the ground and handcuffing her. She screamed, struggling, her rage unrecognizable. I hugged Devon tightly, feeling his tiny body shake against mine, relief flooding me. Grandma, he whispered. You came. I'll always come, my love, I replied, tears streaming freely. Over his shoulder I saw Candace's face as she was led away. The fury was gone, replaced by emptiness, leaving only a hollow shell of the daughter I had once known. The sun rose fully over the horizon, lighting Devon's tear-streaked face as I ran my hand through his hair, marveling at his bravery. In the ambulance checking us, I asked softly, how did you know what she was planning? Devon bit his lip, thoughtful. I wake up early, Grandma. Mama thinks I sleep in, but I lie still thinking. That morning I heard her on the phone. She was angry but trying not to show it. I went to the hallway and listened by the office door. The paramedic finished checking him and stepped aside, giving us a quiet moment, and I held him close, amazed at how this small boy had saved us all. Devon lowered his voice, trembling slightly as he recounted what Candace had said. She wanted Grandpa's money, she was done waiting, and it was all going to look like an accident. His eyes, suddenly older than his 7 years, met mine and I felt a pang of sorrow. I knew no one would believe him if I told them. Adults never seem to trust children when it really matters. That thought broke my heart. How many times had he tried to warn me before, only for me to dismiss his observations as childish imaginings? But I believed you at the airport, I said softly, brushing his hair back. A small, grateful smile spread across his face. Yes, you believed me when it mattered, he whispered. I hugged him tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude for this small, extraordinary boy whose alertness had saved us both. The sergeant approached, his expression a careful mix of relief and concern. Devon, and you need a hospital checkup first, he said, his voice calm. After that we'll take detailed statements, but that can wait a bit. I nodded, thankful for his patience. Then, hesitantly, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me. Candace, what's going to happen to her? The sergeant's voice was low, considerate of Devon nearby. She'll face serious charges. Attempted aggravated murder, kidnapping, illegal possession of a firearm, among others. With the accomplice's testimony and the evidence you gathered, the case is strong. A heavy sadness washed over me, not for the Candace who had pointed a gun at us, but for the little girl she once was, my daughter I had loved so fiercely. Impulsively I asked, can I see her before she's taken away? The sergeant paused, weighing my request. Are you sure? He asked. I am, I said firmly. I need closure. He nodded slowly. It will be brief and supervised. I turned to Devon, who watched intently. Sweetie, I need to talk to your mother for a moment. Can you stay here with Mr. Harrison? His eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing his face. She won't hurt you again, I reassured him gently. The police are everywhere. We're safe now. Wallace, standing quietly nearby, stepped forward with a reassuring grin. We'll be fine, champ. Your grandma will be right back. Devon nodded reluctantly, letting me go. The sergeant led me to one of the patrol cars parked under the shade of a tree. Candace sat in the back seat, handcuffed, her gaze distant, unfocused. As I approached, her eyes slowly lifted, locking on mine, and in that frozen moment, I saw the shadow of my daughter, lost, defiant, and utterly unreachable, staring back at me. There was no anger left in her eyes now, only deep exhaustion and something that, for a brief second, looked like regret. I asked the officer if I could speak to her, and he agreed, opening the door but staying close. Candace, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, why did you do this? She looked at me for a moment, then dropped her gaze. You wouldn't understand, she whispered. Try to explain, I said quietly. I owe that to Devon, and I need to know how you could even think about hurting your own child. Her face tightened with pain. I never meant to, not really, she started, then stopped as if realizing how empty those words sounded. She took a shaky breath and admitted that at first it was only about me, the house, and the insurance money, that she was buried in debt far deeper than I ever knew. Then she mentioned Devon, her voice breaking, and said Marcus convinced her that 2 deaths from a gas leak would seem more believable than 1, and that if only I died, suspicion would fall on her immediately. She said she had tried to suggest sending Devon away somewhere, to school or to relatives, but Marcus had insisted it had to be all or nothing. And you agreed, I said quietly, not as a question but as a realization, and her silence answered me more clearly than any confession could. My voice shook as I told her that Devon would grow up knowing his own mother had planned to harm him for money, and that no child should have to carry such a wound in his heart. Tears ran down her face, though I couldn't tell if they came from true regret or from fear for herself. She whispered that the pressure and the debt had clouded her mind and that it felt like the only way out, but I told her there is always another path, that she could have come to me, that we could have sold the house or used the insurance properly, and that I would have helped her. She snapped back that I would have tried to control everything, the same old bitterness rising again, and in that moment I understood how twisted her view of me and our life together had become. You need more than lawyers, Candace, I said at last. You need real help because there's something inside you that money could never fix. She looked at me with tired eyes, and when I told her Devon would stay with me and that I would do everything I could to help him heal and understand that this does not define who he is, she only nodded slowly and said almost peacefully, "You'll be a better mother to him than I ever was." The officer then signaled that our time was over, and as I stood up, I felt a strange sense of release, as if something heavy had finally loosened its grip on me. "Goodbye, Candace," I said softly, looking at her one last time. "I hope you find peace someday." I turned and walked toward Devon and Wallace, who were waiting beside the ambulance, not daring to look back as the patrol car carried Candace away to face the consequences of her actions, trials, and hopefully treatment. Devon ran to me, wrapping his small arms around my legs. "Are you okay, Grandma?" he asked softly. I crouched down to meet his eyes. "I am, sweetie. Are you?" He nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. "I'm sad but relieved. It's strange to feel both at once." I smiled, moved by his wisdom. "That's perfectly normal, my love." In the weeks that followed, we navigated the whirlwind of police statements, preliminary hearings, and sessions with Devon's child psychologist. The media tried to sensationalize our story, but the sergeant worked to protect our privacy as much as possible. Candace was formally charged and held in pretrial detention, while Marcus, her accomplice, cooperated with the authorities, providing testimony that strengthened the case. Psychiatric evaluations suggested a severe personality disorder worsened by long-standing resentments and financial stress. Devon and I temporarily stayed in Wallace's apartment, seeking a fresh start away from the memories of our old home. Despite the trauma, Devon adjusted remarkably well, though some nights were still haunted by nightmares. One night, as I comforted him after a particularly frightening dream, he asked quietly, "Grandma, why did Mama want to hurt us? Didn't she love us?" I sat on the edge of his bed, searching for words gentle enough for a 7-year-old. "Devon, your mama is sick. Not like the flu, but in a way that affects how she thinks and feels. That sickness made her see things in a distorted way. She did love us, but it caused her to make terrible choices that healthy people wouldn't make. His eyes reflected the soft nightlight as he absorbed my words. "Will she ever get better?" he asked, his voice trembling with hope. "I don't know, sweetheart," I admitted honestly. "Some people improve with treatment, others don't. But what I do know is that you are safe and I love you more than anything." Devon nodded and hugged me tightly. "I love you too, Grandma. Thank you for believing me." "Always," I whispered, kissing his forehead. We stayed that way for a long while, holding each other in the quiet night, our bond strengthened, not broken by fear and betrayal. Eventually, Devon fell asleep in my arms, his breathing even and peaceful, and I watched him with awe, marveling at his courage, his insight, and the depth of his love, which had survived even the darkest of moments. The night Devon pulled me by the arm in the dark airport parking lot, begging me not to go home, he didn't just save our lives, he taught me the most important lesson I've ever learned. Sometimes the deepest truths come from the smallest voices, and wisdom isn't the privilege of age. At 70, I finally understood that. Because of him, I had the chance to watch my grandson grow up, help him heal from trauma, and build a life together grounded in trust, love, and honesty. Watching him sleep, I silently promised to spend every day honoring the courage of that little boy who, with a simple plea, "Grandma, believe me," changed everything. The road ahead would be long and not without tears, nightmares, and hard questions, but it would also be filled with laughter, discovery, and moments of joy. Above all, it would be built on truth, the strongest foundation to rebuild our lives. As the first golden rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds, I adjusted his blanket and quietly slipped from the room, making a cup of coffee in Wallace's small kitchen, watching the city wake up. I thought of the mornings we would share, the days ahead, and of Candace facing the consequences of her choices alone. The pain remained, but alongside it grew something new: hope. Hope that Devon would one day see not only the betrayal that nearly destroyed us but also the moment he found his courage and his voice. That terrible night had become not an end, but the start of something beautiful. And I realized something powerful. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. Trust doesn't always come from experience. It comes from love, from truly listening. Life gave me a painful lesson but also a second chance. To love deeper, protect stronger, and rebuild our lives. If my story touched you, show it with a like and tell me in the comments where and when you're listening. For more life stories like this, subscribe to my channel and explore the 2 new videos on screen. You might find something that inspires you just as much. Love always.